beyond question that Glasgow has sounded the death knell for coal power.
Do you agree that COP26 sounded the death knell on coal?
No.
Given the fact that the agreement did not say that coal needs to be phased down or taken out, it's a big green light for us to build more coal mines.
What you got happening here is our nation earning money.
All year, the Glasgow Climate Conference has loomed over Scott Morrison and the federal government, a pressure point for it to find a credible position on emissions reduction without breaking the coalition.
Very smooth, really smooth.
Despite the PM's attempts last week to reposition on electric vehicles with inner-city Melbourne MPs, the government is now sending very different messages to different voters.
All those people in Glasgow just laying poo on the people in the Hunter Valley. Is that what all those billionaires in their corporate jets?
But, as often happens with such massive international meetings, things didn't quite go to plan.
I also understand the deep disappointment. But I think, as you have noted, it's also vital that we protect this package.
Two crucial developments in the dying days of the conference have shored up Scott Morrison's domestic position on climate. A last-minute intervention on coal by India, which changed the wording of the final communiqué from speaking of the phasing out of coal to the phasing down of coal. There was also a watering down of a proposal for nations to come back with more ambitious emissions reduction targets next year, instead of in 5 years' time, and with a crucial rider. A draft version of the Glasgow Agreement, circulated on Wednesday, urged countries that hadn't upgraded their 2030 targets to do so by the next meeting in November next year. But in the final agreed text, paragraph 29 had changed, now only requesting that parties revisit and strengthen their 2030 targets, taking into account national circumstances.
Are you ruling out a more ambitious 2030 target for COP27 if you're elected?
Well, all that happened at COP26 was all countries noted a request to revisit these things. But I've been very clear about what our target is and that we will meet and beat it.
I find it completely extraordinary that 24 hours after the federal government signed up to having a higher 2030 target in 2022, they've walked away from that commitment that they voluntarily signed up to in Glasgow.
The upshot is that whatever the communiqué says, the government is now claiming legitimacy for its unchanged 2015 emissions reduction targets of 26 to 28%, when the goal for Glasgow by major developed economies was twice that. And it is claiming that the coal industry has nothing to fear.
For all of those who are working in that industry in Australia, they'll continue to be working in that industry for decades to come, because there will be a transition that will occur over a long period of time. And I make no apologies for Australia standing up for our national interests, whether they be our security interests or our economic interests. So let's take a look. Green button to go.
The PM is now in full campaign mode on the unofficial hustings again in Western Sydney today.
Do you regard yourself as the underdog at this election?
Well, I think that's fairly clear.
Campaigning, of course, means setting up differences between yourself and your opponents, and for the PM, seeking to exploit what focus groups are saying is a frustration with intervening governments after 2 years of lockdowns.
We're not going to legislate them and regulate them and force them to do things. I think Australians have had a gutful of governments telling them what to do over the last couple of years. The Labor Party loves telling people what to do, and the only thing they like doing more than that is taxing them.
Labor has long said it would wait for two things before setting out its own climate change policies: the Glasgow Conference and the release of the government's economic modelling. The modelling was released on Friday and met with widespread derision for its lack of detail. As the Prime Minister says, the modelling is based on the private sector doing things, not the government. As a result, it is a forecast, not a plan. As we have previously reported, 15% of the reduction in emissions by 2050 come from unspecified further technology breakthroughs. It is also built on a voluntary carbon price of between $24 and $400 a tonne.
Prime Minister, this net zero modelling released on Friday appears to show to get to net zero you need a carbon price of between $24 a tonne and $400 a tonne. What's the difference between that and a carbon tax?
Well, what we have is the cost of abatement that is run through our Climate Solutions Fund. tax.
Doesn't that pass cost on?
Tax. No, there's no carbon tax in Australia, and there won't be one because we are for technology, not taxes.
But that's funded through tax, isn't it? I mean, ultimately we're paying, when you're putting out these incentives, these subsidies.
We're not putting a tax on Australians to do that, not at all.
The race is now on between a ticking economic clock and bad polling for the government. The government wants to go to the polls with the economy bouncing back, but before it faces the threat of higher global inflation and interest rates.
Of course, making sure you're paying less tax.
Talk of another budget before a poll has pushed election speculation into May, but the option of a March election on the back of a mini-budget contained in a late mid-year budget review in January is still an option if things go well for the government. At least that would mean just 4 more months of high-vis jackets on news bulletins every night.
Not too bad.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.